What up, though? Thanks for stopping by. As we peel back the layers of the proverbial onion. This is from Making History. Making History. Making Alabama History. Lewis Adams, born in slavery in Tuskegee, Macon County, Alabama on October 27th, 1842. I'm sure all of you are familiar with anyone who looks like you or anyone who is considered colored or black or Negro, but properly American, American Indian, the only American there ever was, is, and will be. And more specifically, whatever your people called you and what they called themselves in these places. Tuskegee, 1842. One of my bloodlines leads me to Tuskegee. Tuskegee. It is said that the surface level knowledge, it is said that Tuskegee is an Indian word, and it is said that it means warrior. Quite a few of my relatives or my ancestors are from Tuskegee, are from Macon County, Alabama. It says Lewis Adams, born in slavery in Tuskegee, Macon County, Alabama, on October 27th, 1842. Lewis Adams spent the early years of his life in his father's plantation service shops, where he mastered the trades of tinsmithing, harness making, and shoemaking. So right here, if you're not careful, you'll allow your mind to be in control of you and come up with its own interpretation of what you just read. Born in slavery, Lewis spent the early years of his life in his father's plantation service shops, where he mastered the trades of tinsmithing, harness making, and shoemaking. Born in slavery means that he was a dependent of his father. When we hear these terms like born in slavery, usually it means that with the father being the head of the household in this new language that was imposing, being forced upon these people. The father is the head of the household and everyone else are dependents of his. What's another term for dependent? Slave, so to speak. So as you can see from the first two lines, I don't want to say we're being lied to, but there is word play. To be honest with you, there is no word play. If you know the meaning of these words, it's really plain. Born in slavery, born in an idea, because as you know, this slavery thing has taken on a life of its own. Whereas today, you hear the word slave and immediately you think a certain thing and that thing more than likely isn't true. Listen, born in slavery, okay? Lewis Adams spent the early years of his life. Now, the early years of his life would be from the time he was born until what? Early years of your life until you're 20. So he was born in his father's home, on his father's plantation, where he mastered the trades of tinsmithing, horse harness making, and shoemaking. How many of y'all learn? How many of y'all master these skills at an early age? Lewis Adams did. He also taught himself to read and write by going over some of the lessons the other Adams children received from a hired tutor. A hired tutor. He married the former Sarah Sally Green. Wait a minute. He also taught himself to read and write by going over some of the lessons the other Adams children received from a hired tutor. He married the former Sarah Sally Green, the mulatto daughter of the owner of the adjoining green plantation before slavery ended. So he married a sister that lived next door. When the Civil War, and mind you, him and the sister, both of their mother and fathers were the quote owners of the soil that each of them lived on and were raised on and mastered these skills on and got married on. I guarantee if we go into the genealogy and we get their marriage license, pull their marriage license up, Sarah Sally Green and Lewis Adams, I guarantee they got married in one of their father's and mother's households. When the Civil War results abolished slavery in 1865, Lewis Adams left his father's plantation and opened his own shop in downtown Tuskegee, near the site of the current public square. Now, see, when the Civil War results abolished slavery. Now, what is slavery? Well, Lewis Adams, it says, born in slavery. He spent the early years on his father's plantation service shops, where he mastered various trades. So in this case, slavery means he was a dependent of his father. When the Civil War ended, abolished slavery, what does this mean in this context? This means that he left his father's care. He no longer was a dependent of his father. And why would he be? He was an adult. And at this point, his father couldn't make him continue to work for him. For lack of a better phrase, work for him. Although he wasn't working for him, he was working for the family. He was laboring for the family, which means laboring for his people and himself. Lewis Adams left his father's plantation and opened his own shop in downtown Tuskegee, near the site of the current public square. At the family residence, his wife Sally, mother of his 16 children, taught cooking and sewing to interested young women, as both places attracted many more students than they could accommodate. Lewis Adams wished for a vocational school to provide this training. He worked closely with the George W. Campbell. He worked worked closely with Mr. George W. Campbell in securing Booker T. Washington from Hampton Institute as the first principal, joining the faculty himself in 1890 as the leader of his three trades, as the teacher of his three trades. In fact, Lewis Adams had hosted the young Booker T. Washington at his residence from the time he arrived in Tuskegee until Mr. Washington found a place to live. While arranging for the new school to begin operating in the adjacent shed, which belonged to the AME Zion Church, the elder daughter of Lewis Adams, Mary Ann, prepared his first meal upon his arrival in Tuskegee. As he was the vital harbinger to Booker T. Washington, the career of Lewis Adams is sine qua non in the Tuskegee Institute story. Sine qua non. This is, I'm assuming, Latin. And this is Lewis Adams. It's a picture of Lewis Adams. As he was the vital harbinger to Booker T. Washington, the career of Lewis Adams is sine qua non in the Tuskegee Institute story. Booker T. Washington wrote of Lewis Adams, the leading colored citizen in Tuskegee is Mr. Lewis Adams, to whom the honor should largely be given for securing the location of the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute in the town. Mr. Adams is not only an intelligent and successful businessman, but is one who combines with his business enterprise rare common sense and discretion. In the most trying periods of the growth of the Tuskegee Institute, I have always found Mr. Adams a man on whom I could rely for the wisest advice. He enjoys the higher respect and confidence of the citizens of both races, and it is largely through his power and influence that the two races live together in harmony and peace in the town. Confidence of the citizens of both races. Now, these both races, what do you think he's speaking of? Booker T. Washington wrote of Lewis Adams, the leading colored citizen in Tuskegee is Mr. Lewis Adams. The citizens of both races. The two races live together in harmony and peace in the town. Now, if I was to guess the two races, I would say Booker T. Washington called Lewis Adams colored, so I would assume the other race are settlers, pilgrims. Now, when referring to the two races, Booker T. Washington is no doubt speaking of the Americans, the American Indians, who he falsely called colored. However, I can see these terms being synonymous and also referring to the Anglo-Saxon or the Caucasian, or those citizens termed white at the time. So the two races would be the falsely termed colored, properly American Indians or Americans, and the settlers, the Anglo-Saxon race. Yes. This is a picture of American Indian and African American students at Hampton Institute, Women Studying Human Respiratory System, 1899. And if you can remember, we already went over this, but the dates are important. If you can remember, it says, born in slavery in Tuskegee, Macon County, Alabama, on October 27th, 1842. Lewis Adams spent the early years of his life in his father's plantation service shops. 1842 is when he was born into what they term as slavery, the idea that is perpetuated to this very day. Yes, it's a word that stings, but it is also synonymous with worker, laborer, employee. Here is a picture, 1899, and Lewis Adams was born 1842. So he wasted no time in achieving. American Indian and African American students at Hampton Institute, Women Studying Human Respiratory System, 1899. Booker T. Washington said colored, right? Who said anything about an African American? It doesn't exist. There is no such thing. American Indians. Okay? Those are the only people in this picture, are American Indians, who are falsely called colored by Booker T. Washington. Here we go. Students in library reading room, Tuskegee Institute, 1902. The previous picture is 1899 at Hampton Institute, 1899, Hampton. This picture is students in library reading room at Tuskegee Institute in 1902. They didn't waste any time achieving. Here is another picture of Tuskegee, Alabama Institute chemistry students taken in 1902. You think if they're taking chemistry in 1902 that they just became aware of chemistry's existence and how it relates to the natural world? Here is a picture. Booker T. Washington is seated directly, well, I should say it's a settler, a pilgrim, a Anglo-Saxon gentleman settled in the very middle, seated in the first row in the very middle of the picture. And Booker T. Washington, from looking at the screen, is seated to his left. Again, there is Booker T. Washington in a picture with some of those men. And if you look to your far left, this gentleman will become the subject. Here he is right here. His name is Robert Curtis Ogden. This gentleman is Robert Curtis Ogden. Okay, we go back up a little. You can see him at the far left of the screen. Booker T. Washington is second from the right, just for a point of reference. And if we look down here, these are people at either, I believe, Hampton or Tuskegee, one of those two schools. Robert Ogden is seated at the far left. A life well lived in memory of Robert Curtis Ogden. Here he is again, Robert Curtis Ogden. This is 1914, Hampton Institute Press. Hampton Institute Press. On August 6, 1913, after a long illness, Robert C. Ogden died in his summer home in Kennebunkport, Maine. Mr. Ogden was born in Philadelphia in 1836. In 1858, he moved to New York, and all his business life was spent in these two cities. Memorial services were held in New York October 26 and in Brooklyn November 9th, 1913. On these occasions, addresses were delivered by Dr. Francis Brown, president of Union Theological Seminary, Dr. Francis G. Peabody, vice president of the Board of Trustees of Hampton Institute, and a few other people. Mitchell, president of the Virginia Medical College, Dr. L. Mason Clark, pastor of the First Presbyterian Church, Brooklyn, ex-president William H. Taft of Yale University, and Honorable Job E. Hedges of New York. In the death of Robert C. Ogden, Hampton Institute has experienced one of the greatest losses in its history. Now, we just read about, what's the gentleman's name? Lewis Adams? That's a shame. I already forgot the guy's name. Lewis Adams. Let's go back up. I want to make sure I'm giving him his props. Okay, yes. Lewis Adams. Now we see that it seemed as though Lewis Adams spearheaded Tuskegee Institute. Now we are speaking of Hampton University, Hampton College. And we're speaking of Robert Curtis Ogden. Why are we speaking of him? Well, let's find out. In the death of Robert C. Ogden, Hampton Institute has experienced one of the greatest losses in its history. A member of its board of trustees since 1874 and president of that body since 1894, he has had much to do with the wonderful growth of this school, founded in 1868 by his friend General Samuel Chapman Armstrong. Their friendship began on that day more than 45 years ago when young Armstrong, that would do you well to look up who General Samuel Chapman Armstrong is. I would, but I'm not going to do everything. Their friendship began on the day more than 45 years ago when young Armstrong, after a long journey from his Hawaiian home, carried to Mr. Ogden in New York a letter of introduction, continued steadfast until unbroken until General Armstrong's death in 1893. And the result of that friendship, a lifelong devotion on Mr. Ogden's part of his time, thought, money, and influence to the type of education which his friend had given his life, is today shown in the success of Hampton and Tuskegee institutes as exponents of that type of education, learning by doing and the development of character through self-help. No details of a large and absorbing business ever interfered with Mr. Ogden's annual trip to Hampton with a party of friends as his guests who were asked to take part in the ceremony of laying the cornerstone of some new building or invited to note the mute appeal of a foundation dug by willing hands but waiting for the wherewithal to erect the much needed superstructure. These friends never failed to gain new inspiration and greater incentive to work for others, or to carry away in their hearts stronger faith in the work for downtrodden races, which in those days was to Hampton's founders a tremendous struggle against the great odds. Let's go over that again. Now, remember, this is Curtis Ogden. They're speaking of Mr. Ogden. And you ask why we're speaking of him today. Well, as a matter of fact, let's look at what he thought of you, or what was thought of you. Okay. These friends never failed to gain new inspiration and greater incentive to work for others, or to carry away in their hearts stronger faith in the work for downtrodden races. Now, what races would he be talking about? Remember, Booker T. Washington said 2 races, right? I wonder which one he's speaking of. In the fall of 1896, Mr. Ogden delivered an address at the opening of the Hampton Trade School in which he spoke of the new opportunity it afforded the Negro to hold his own industrially in the South. Now, now think about this. Lewis Adams had mastered trades as a young boy, right? So I don't think the Negro, or properly the American Indian, needed any help, do you? Afforded the Negro to hold his own industrially in the South. I think maybe someone wanted to put the American to make sure the American would always work to share his mastery with one of those 2 races. What do you think? Huh? He always welcomed every such opportunity, not only at Hampton, but in the world outside. He was a true friend to the Negro and Indian races. Negro and Indian races. There's no such thing as a Negro. So who is he talking about? American Indians, peoples, and to all other backward peoples. He was a true friend to the Negro and Indian races and to all other backward peoples. The graduates of Hampton count among their dearest memories the words of fatherly advice they heard on anniversary day from the president of the Board of Trustees as he sent them out to their life work, which you're still doing to this day. Robert Curtis Ogden by Francis Greenberg Peabody. Among the many public interests of his varied life, none was nearer to his heart than the service of Hampton, and nowhere was he more completely appreciated and revered. Now, why would he spend so much time, programming your ancestors so that we today would carry on the labors for life? He was drawn, and so they could benefit as well from the various inventions of the Americans. He was drawn to this care of the colored race. He was drawn to this care of the colored race. Hear that? They mentioned Negro and Indian races, but now he was drawn to this care of the colored race. Just one. Okay, so what is he talking about? Americans. The only Americans it ever was, is, and will be. Let's shake it. He was drawn to this care. Why do you always need to be cared for? Put under a microscope, handled. He was drawn to this care of the colored race by the irresistible magnetism of Samuel Armstrong, whom he had known and loved. I never gave up or sacrificed anything in my life, wrote Armstrong in the touching memoranda found after his death, and after having apparently sacrificed everything to serve a few colored boys and girls. General Armstrong, they serving a few colored boys and girls. Now they want to serve you. But first they was you was shackled from you had iron shackles on the neck, wrist, and ankles, and you was chattel slavery. But now after apparently sacrificed everything to serve a few colored boys and girls, I don't like the sound of that. General Armstrong died in 1893, and in 1894, Mr. Ogden became president of the Board of Trustees of Hampton. Under his administration, its buildings multiplied, its standard advanced, its staff of teachers strengthened, and in the 20 years of his presidency, its invested property increased eightfold from 379,000 to 2,642,000. In 1899, a larger area of service opened before him. A few northern and southern men had met. Men, no races, no colors. You don't know who these men are. In 1899, a larger area of service opened before him. A few northern and southern men had met in 1898 at Capon Springs for a conference on education in the South, and the principal of Hampton discerned in this gathering a new opportunity for cooperative deliberation. Mr. Ogden responded with enthusiasm to this new call and invited a considerable company of friends to attend the second session of the conference to procure a frank and fraternal interchange a frank and fraternal interchange of views between the two sections of our common land. It was the first of a series of such journeys which proved to be missionary enterprises for the instruction of the North, as well as sources of new confidence and inspiration for the disheartened but indomitable South. At the conference this year in Richmond, Virginia, the United States Commissioner of Education did not hesitate to affirm that both of the organizations which have done such unparalleled service for the American education, the Southern Education Board, with its program of encouragement for the South, and the General Education Board with its vast operations in all parts of the country for education in the universities, the secondary and rural schools, and for national sanitation, may be traced in their origins to these meetings over which Mr. Ogden presided, and in whose development he had so dominant a share. I shall never forget going one day into the great business establishment which he had created, and mounting from floor to floor through the busy crowds until I came at last to a little upper room. There, above the noises of trade, a dozen of the busiest of businessmen sat in quiet deliberation concerning great projects of national welfare, and interchanged their dreams of the better America. Planning your future, planning our futures. They planned our futures. Robert T. Ogden's Labors in the South by Samuel Childs Mitchell, Ph.D. It is pleasing to tabulate the statistics that show the increase in school revenues, in the attendance of children, in the efficiency of teaching, and in the moral support given to public education during the past decades in the South. I can never forget the first time I saw him, when he stood upon the platform at Hampton Institute giving a fatherly message to the graduating class of Indian and colored youth that stood before him. I can never forget the first time I saw him, when he stood upon the platform at Hampton Institute giving a fatherly message, which all the students already had fathers, to the graduating class of Indian and colored youth, or to the graduating class of American Indian youth that stood before him. He seemed to breathe into the characters of those people his own large spirit of faith, encouragement, aspiration, and spirit of social service. My thought of divinity became clearer and more concrete as I listened to his works of wisdom and of love. Of love. He in the mood for love. His philanthropy took naturally the form of a structural purpose, namely to achieve for the South through the training of children and through the process of social growth results, which all other means, including war and politics, had been unable to produce. Listen closely. His philanthropy took naturally the form of a structural purpose, namely to achieve for the South through the training of children. It didn't say to achieve for the South through the training of adults who wanted to be trained, who knew what the intentions were, who knew what the motives were, through the training of children and through the process of social growth, results which all other means, including war and politics. So the war, they already tried warring with you, with your ancestors. They already did the politics with them. But them rural country folk, your people, they wasn't budging. They couldn't be moved by that. So how do you move these people? Through the training of children and through the process of social growth results, which all other means, including war and politics, had been unable to produce. The chief evil of slavery was not economic nor political. Listen, I'm only reading this once. The chief evil of slavery was not economic nor political, but mental and moral. Slavery tended to gag the South. Its sole imperative was, thou shalt not think. Sir Horace Plunkett, while sitting in the British Parliament for 8 years, discerned that England, in applying for centuries political remedies to Ireland's economic wrongs, had failed. It occurred to him one day that it might be well to apply economic remedies to Ireland's economic wrongs. He left his seat in Parliament, went to Ireland and began to improve the farms, to sweeten the homes, to establish cooperative dairies, and to enrich the life of the peoples through efficient schools, libraries, and social gatherings. A humble program to be sure, but it is remaking Ireland, something that 8 centuries of blood and iron had been unable to do. I believe that it was given to a businessman to hit upon a sounder principle for economic progress, racial adjustment, and national integration than was vouchsafed to any politician or general in the annals of America. The conquest of education alone are enduring. The conquest of education alone are enduring. One former is worth a dozen reformers. One former is worth a dozen reformers. What a lurid glare is shed upon the follies and waste of war and reconstruction in view of the beneficent changes wrought by those silent forces of light and love. Never was more finely revealed the regenerative impulse in the heart of men than the signal results of this educational movement through the power of public opinion. In the case of millions of children, Mr. Ogden thinks in their brain throbs in their heart, speaks in their conscience, and makes their will leap like a resolute muscle in its task in fulfilling the will of God. Who is God? Mr. Ogden trained a group of social workers who, even at this early time, are displaying power in foreign embassies, in the cabinet at Washington, in the Federal Bureau of Education, and in the international task of public health and sanitation. We were at Who is God? Mr. Ogden trained a group of social workers who, even at this early time, are displaying power in foreign embassies, in the cabinets at Washington, in the Federal Bureau of Education, and in the international task of public health and sanitation. The main thing is to stimulate the people of the community to do well by their own schools. Now, remember, Lewis Adams had mastered three trades while on his father's plantation, or while on his plantation as well, because he was his father's son. The main thing is to stimulate the people of the community to do well by their own schools. I would have to say that Lewis Adams' plantation, his soil portion, was school enough. And of course, the education came from his mother and father and his family, his peoples. Because they never the woman who he later would marry, her peoples were in the dwelling not too far from his. But we didn't learn about Lewis Adams' peoples who may have been on the other side of them. So I would say that they were doing fine. The main thing is to stimulate the people of the community to do well by their own schools. The principle of local taxation, the principle of local taxation, the necessity of community control, and the power of public opinion were the three prime factors in his plan of educational campaign for the South. Now, do you understand why people were willing to go to war or willing to fight? The principle of local taxation, the necessity of community control, and the power of public opinion were the three prime factors in his plan of educational campaign for the South. Remember the small room, the upper room meeting? Instead of being able to point to a single school that bore his name, he could point to state systems of schools into which he had breathed the energy of his own great personality. Take, for instance, Georgia. In 1902, the state was spending upon its public schools $1,125,000. Last year, it spent about $5,125,000. In 1902, the value of school property was $4 million, and within the decade, it climbed to more than $11 million, an actual increase of about $7 million. Within the same period, the number of school days rose from 113 to 140. During the same decade, the increase in enrollment was 115,000 children, with coercion, no doubt. The actual increase in the per capita expenditure according to enrollment was $6.18. Illiteracy among the whites was reduced from 12 to 7%, and among the Negroes or American Indians from 52% to 36%. This bare recital of the advance of schools in the single state of Georgia is an index of the beneficent changes wrought throughout the entire South by the cooperation of all the agencies at work for social betterment. Now, mind you, when you see numbers of, when you hear the word illiteracy, understand that before Lewis Adams went to a school, he mastered tinsmithing, shoemaking, and one more trade that he had mastered before he stepped into a school. But he was still, now later he taught himself how to read, but he was still considered illiterate. Why? Because he couldn't read and write. And maybe because he didn't know some of the great Renaissance painters of Europe. See, you have to understand, what is if you're taking care of yourself, if you're self-sufficient, if all of your needs are met, why would you need to know how to read and write? What has reading and writing got you? A better job? About 20 million was added annually to the revenues of public schools within a period of 10 years. Since 1906, about 1,000 high schools have been established and developed. The significance of these figures is beyond the power of words to express. I would say so. And guess what? As you can see, there is a sense of urgency to get the children into these schools to be educated by complete strangers. Strangers that are from the community, no doubt. So I wouldn't say complete strangers. But there was a sense of urgency to separate them from what they were doing before. Living. In 1779, Thomas Jefferson drew out a liberal scheme. A liberal scheme. Now, if you scheming on somebody, you already know what time it is. Okay, ain't no way to make that pretty. In 1779, one line says everything. In 1779, Thomas Jefferson drew out a liberal scheme for public education in the South, beginning with elementary schools for all the people and rising through the high school to the state university in accordance with the social structure of the South at that day. The only part of his scheme which was carried out with the apex, namely the University of Virginia. It fell to a later day to build beneath that apex the solid body of the pyramid, consisting of the common schools at the base and the high schools resting upon them, all capped by the state university, of which many of your peoples, many of my peoples are so enamored with today and consider so prestigious and gives them such a confidence. This solid structure of public education is now rising in every southern state. He became in turn connected with the country life movement, with vast plans in the interest of public health and endowment of colleges, with the effort to make the state university the moral fortress of a democratic commonwealth. With the causes of social unrest throughout the nation, with the housing problem and the diverse evils growing out of industrial conditions in this country, with the housing problems and the diverse evils growing out of industrial conditions in this country. Heard that before? Housing. Before your people were living on plantations, before your people was taking care of themselves. Tinsmithing, making shoes. When George Adam Smith was asked how he accounted for the marvelous intellectual outpost of Scotland during recent decades, he said that he attributed it in no small degree to the fact that in the 70s, Mr. Moody put every man and woman in Scotland to reading the Bible with fresh interest. The intellectual energies thus aroused had taken, to be sure, a direction in literature, science, and religion undreamed of by Mr. Moody, who in this way imparted the initial impulse to the Scottish mind. Could that Scottish mind have been similar to the American mind? Could they have also been children? It was impossible for the minds of millions of people to be thus stirred to the depths by elemental forces without the generation of large civic impulses and new ideals. This educational movement modernized the Southerner's mind, the Southern mind. This educational movement modernized the Southern mind. Related it anew to the larger facts in the world today, and gave the people of the South a new sense of their latent power and the possibilities of cooperation for nobler ends. You get it? Cooperation for nobler ends with the noble savage. The decade marked the return to fundamentals, such as the fertility of the soil upon which the home, school, and churches depend, such as the duty of the state to the child in a democracy like ours, such as the duty of the state to the child in a democracy like ours. Listen, we've heard child, we've heard children. Have we heard parents, adults? uncles, aunties, grandma, grandpa. Such is the relation of health to social progress and intellectual power. Such is the necessity of cooperation for the growth of community life. Such is the benefits to be derived from international experience in working out local problems touching the farm, school, sanitation, and racial adjustment. Mr. Ogden enlisted through the North men and women of initiative as co-workers in the task of the South and a task force for the South. With him, this noble hand of friends, Quakers, would make an annual pilgrimage to the conference for education, study the facts in the Southern situation for themselves, and strike friendships there of enduring and fruitful character. Mr. Ogden, hospitality was kingly, and the list of his friends would make up the honor roll of America. Robert C. Ogden, The Philanthropist, by William Howard Taft. We live in an age in which there is real encouragement for hope of the world's and the country's spiritual and moral improvement in the awakened human sympathy that manifests itself not only in greater public interest in promoting the welfare of those who have fallen behind the race of life and are not sharing as they should the benefit of the general comfort, but also in the increased sense of personal responsibility on the part of those who now have the means of helping others, leading them to exert every effort to make these means effective. You know what I got out of that? Your ancestors was doing good. Your ancestors was living life. They were self-sufficient. Our people were self-sufficient. All their needs were met. They were healthful. They made stuff. And these settlers were jealous. Not jealous is too weak of a word. It wasn't jealousy. It was survival. They need to share. Your ancestors need to share. That's what it was. They was being stingy. They was being niggardly. You know that's the word, right? Stingy, niggardly, stingy. Your people is y'all some stingy. That's what it was, right? That's what I got from that paragraph. Now, one of the great conserving and conservative factors in making clear such mistakes of misdirected enthusiasm and absence of common sense and mitigating their possible danger is the influence and example of a man like Robert C. Ogden, whose life has been devoted to the cause of the purest philanthropy, who did everything he did to accomplish the high ultimate purpose that he had in mind, to furnish opportunity for self-help to an unfortunate race and a retarded section of our country. Robert Curtis Ogden, Kurt said who did. Kurt did everything he did to accomplish the high ultimate purpose that he had in mind, to furnish opportunity for self-help to an unfortunate race and a retarded section of our country. We are not able now fully and justly to estimate the value of his work for the education of the Negro, or properly the American Indian, the only American there ever was, is, and will be. We are not able now fully and justly to estimate the value of his work for the education of the Negro and for education generally in the South, because he was taken from us in the doing. That not for many years yet can we weigh, this is Taft speaking about Robert C. Ogden. This is the former President Taft. that not for many years yet can we weigh all the good that he planned and did, and its ultimate effect upon a section of this country whose social history has been full of difficult problems, and for a race of which this people must be trustees and guardians for many decades to come. Yikes! Yikes! It was my good fortune to be associated with Mr. Ogden. He said it was his good fortune to be associated with someone like this. It was my good fortune to be associated with Mr. Ogden in several of the many projects for the betterment of the Negro and of education which claimed and had his interest and his effective support. See, they say the Negro. They don't even say Indian no more because it's synonymous. You are synonymous with American Indian because you are the American, the only American it ever was, is, and will be. And as you can see, you have been under a microscope and the subject of America since the Pilgrims landed. Since they landed, called your soil land, and told you how stingy you was, and told you they don't want to live next door to you. They sick of what you doing. They sick of you. You a problem. One object of this meeting, I understand, is to commemorate Mr. Ogden's relation to Hampton Institute. Certainly no feature of Mr. Ogden's activities better deserved to be recalled and emphasized than what he did for Hampton. He did it because he knew that Hampton Institute was the mother of movement toward the vocational betterment of society, white and black throughout the country. White and black throughout the country. They speak of white and black. Who is black? Black is what they falsely call Negro, properly American. Throughout the country. Who is white? White is the foreigner. Throughout the country. There began the plan to prepare men and women in their youth to do well. See, children, youth, to do well the work they are to do in life. To fit them to get as much for themselves and for society out of their labor as the intelligent training of hands and faculties by actual trial will secure. I regret to say that in all the enormous sums given for philanthropy in which we greatly rejoice, there has been some lack of clear perception by the donors of the very great part of Hampton has played in the saving of an unfortunate race. Sheesh. They don't think much of y'all. They don't think much of us, do they? Man. They do not think much of us. We retarded. We unfortunate. We this. We downtrodden. We causing problems. It don't matter but most of all, we stingy because we won't share. In furnishing opportunity for its self-elevation. I regret to say that in all the enormous sums given for philanthropy in which we greatly rejoice, there has been some lack of clear perception by the donors of the very great part that Hampton has played in the saving of an unfortunate race and in furnishing opportunity for its self-elevation. And one of the greatest blows that Hampton has suffered is the taking of Mr. Ogden from among us. He represented in the highest sense the real Christian gentleman. And here we have a picture of some brothers and sisters from Hampton. No, this is from Tuskegee. This is a picture of some brothers and sisters at Tuskegee. Okay, the Americans, the American engines. The engine that what you need to move and shake. Tuskegee University Archive Repository Collection, Booker T. Washington with faculty. Booker T. Washington Center with Tuskegee Institute University faculty members, Carnegie Library, Tuskegee Institute, circa 1908, 1915. They're in front of the Carnegie Library, Tuskegee Institute. Booker T. Washington is with the faculty members. This is 1908 to 1915. Okay. Tuskegee, Macon County, Alabama. Here's a picture of Tuskegee University Archives. This is a Farm and Home Demonstration Agents, Tuskegee Institute, July 15th, 1925. This is what this is. Farm and Home Demonstration Agents, Tuskegee Institute, July 15th, 1925. These are your people training you up to work for the United States. The Extension Service at Tuskegee operated throughout the Black Belt of Alabama, serving the communities that the segregated Extension Service at Auburn University did not. Extension Service agents worked with the USDA and state of Alabama to conduct agricultural research and disseminate information on agriculture and homemaking throughout the state. Basically, they work with the USDA and the state of Alabama to teach them. These are your ancestors teaching the foreigners. Okay? This is a picture of real life Americans, American engines, Tuskegee. Brothers and sisters, Tuskegee. Smiles on their face like true American Indians. This is Hampton University's 79th annual opening convocation, Sunday, September 25th, 2022. Keynote speaker, Darrell K. Williams, 13th president of Hampton University, Robert C. Ogden Hall. Processional begins at 10 a.m. Live stream will begin at 10:45 a.m. The event is open to the public. 79th annual opening convocation at Hampton University, Sunday, September 25th, 2022. Keynote speaker, Darrell K. Williams, the brother is pictured right there, 13th president of Hampton University. This will be taking place at the Robert C. Ogden Hall. This is a 50 plus shades of copper chart by creativebooster.net. Copper, dark copper, light copper, medium copper, burnt copper, pale copper, ancient copper, antique copper. Oh, you get the picture. It's 50 plus shades of copper. Here is a piece of copper in the raw. Take a look. Another piece of copper in the raw copper. Another piece of copper, copper in the raw. Take a look. Vicksburg, Mississippi newspaper, Wednesday, March 17th, 1852. Vicksburg, Mississippi newspaper, Wednesday, March 17th, 1852. Didn't even know they had a newspaper in 1852, but they do. Vicksburg Whig newspaper. Committed to the jail of Washington County, Mississippi on the 28th February by C.L. Robards. An acting justice of the peace for said county, a runaway slave calling himself Richard Campbell, and say that he belongs to Thomas Berry of Port Port Gibson, Mississippi. Said slave is about 5 feet 9 inches high, of dark copper complexion, and 24 years old. He says that he escaped from the steamer Glendy Bark. The owner is required to come forward, prove property, and take said slave away, or he will be dealt with as the law directs. Vicksburg Wig, Wednesday, March 17th, 1852. Joseph, runaways in jail, Mississippi. Joseph, 29 years old, 5 feet 7 inches high, yellow complexion, speaks broken English, belongs to Mr. Dennis. Scott, 26 years old, 5 feet 6 inches high, black, stout built, full, broad features. Leonard, 12 years old. Leonard, 13 years old, 5 foot 9 inches high, copper color. Belongs to Dr. J.C. Jenkins, Adams County, Mississippi. Vicksburg Wig newspaper, Vicksburg, Mississippi, Wednesday, March 17th, 1852. Lauderdale County. John, 46 years old, 5 foot 4 inches high, weighs 135 pounds, brown mulatto. He's a brown mulatto. Whatever that means. Figure it out. Simon, 33 years old, 5 foot 8 inches high. Bright mulatto. So we got a brown mulatto, then we got a bright mulatto. Weighs 155 pounds, belongs to Miss Evelina Watkins of Marengo County, Alabama. Choctaw County. Bill, 25 or 30 years old, dark complexion. Weighs about 160 pounds, about 5'9". Belongs to the estate of James Spain. Claiborne County. His name what? Buster, 25 years old, 5 foot 6 inches high, black, 5 foot 6 inches high, black scar on his foot from an axe. Lost one tooth on lower jaw, and 2 on each side of upper jaw. Fred, 45 years old, 5 feet 8 inches high, black, large hands, thick lips, both eye teeth out. What? Both eye teeth out. Belongs to A. Burwell, Jackson, Mississippi. David Jackson, 36 years old, 5 foot 4 inches high, black, good teeth, scar on the top of his head, and 1 on the back of his right hand, right eye weak. Belongs to Robert Linton of Amite County, Mississippi. Vicksburg Wig, Vicksburg, Mississippi, Wednesday, March 17th, 1862. Jacob, 30 years old, dark copper color, small scar on the left eye and on his forehead, 5 foot 7 inches, weighs 150 to 160. Belongs to James Tier near New Carthage, Louisiana. George, 20 years old, black, 5 feet 11 inches high, marked with smallpox, 4 scars on his neck under the chin. Says he belongs to Miss Martha McLaren and was hired to William Ellis, East Feliciana, Louisiana. Webster's Dictionary, 1828. American Dictionary of the English Language, 1828. American, a native of America, originally applied to the aboriginals or copper-colored races found here by the Europeans, but now applied to the descendants of Europeans born in America. American, a native of America, originally applied to the aboriginals or copper-colored races, i.e., yo peoples. do the right thing.